Last discussant is Dr. Tony Laviña. Dr. Laviña is a trustee of the Manila Observatory and teaches law, governance, and philosophy in, among others, the Ateneo de Manila University and University of the Philippines. Over to you po, Dr. Laviña.
Salamat, Bea. Thank you very much for introducing me, and thank you, of course, to OML, Manila Observatory, and the other conveners of this important meeting and forum on the latest IPCC report of Working Group 2. I listened. I'm actually in between classes, so yan ang maganda sa pandemic na nagkaroon ng the ability to be tri-located, di ba? So I'm actually in between a philosophy class, a law class, and this forum, while also arranging for a very important human rights mission to have autopsies done of two Lumad teachers killed in Davao. But this is very important for me. I listened to the press conference when the report was released. I've read as much as I could of it. I listened also to our colleagues from that were part of the report. And the first thing you kind of ask right away is, what's new, diba? What's new? I mean, those of us who have been doing this, and I've read every IPCC report from the first report in 1990 to the present, to this last one, we do know the answer to that. But to the general public, I actually gave a talk about this already yesterday to a very interesting group of sustainability managers of all our top land development companies, no, Ayala Land, Aboitiz, everyone was there. Everyone was there, and I gave them a briefing on the working group to report from what I have observed in a day, and I emphasized what was different, what was new. Not just the added information, not just the quality of the information, but the kind of conclusions we get, which should both alarm us, but also guide us in the actions that we should make. So I want to limit myself actually to 3 points that I would share. I echo everyone's reactions to this and the recommendations that our colleagues have given. And what I'd like is to add value lang. Dagdagan ko lang siguro ng ibang perspective, ibang value from where I come from, no, on this issue, given my experience, given the roles I have played as negotiator, activist, academic, international expert. I just had come from a long stint, 4-year stint in the Green Climate Fund, and now back to international advocacy in trying to influence negotiations in the next 5 years with Act 2025, a coalition which includes, which is led by the World Resources Institute, and Manila Observatory is part of that. The first thing I'd like to say is how important it is to get this report out and its conclusions out in a way that survives all the attacks that will be foisted on it by trolls, by disinformation. I think it's very important when you start communicating this, or as you have done now, especially the scientists, that you need to be aware that there's a whole ecosystem of this information on climate change, on pandemic science, and as you know very well, on politics, right? And on human rights that's going on. They're all interrelated, by the way. I convened and chair right now a movement against disinformation that's focused more on the elections and human rights in the Philippines. But we intend to pivot to actually climate change, disinformation, and and pandemic disinformation, maybe not as much anymore, hopefully. But certainly climate change disinformation will continue to be out there. This crisis in Ukraine, if you've been following, has actually uh, uh, brought back to business all these fossil fuel lobbyists, right, telling us how stupid you are for going to renewable energy and endangering energy security. In the Philippines, you will see that because we are going to have an energy crisis probably in the next 6 to 9 months, and there's going to be a very big pushback. This report helps us in that pushback by showing what, in fact, we are already facing and what we are still about to face. Uh, the facts, the quality of the science, the certainty of the conclusions, to the extent that scientists can be certain, will be a very big instrument in that war over the truth. So that's the first point I'd like to add to this discussion. The second point is about scale of the response. Diba? Yung you listen, pakinggan mo yung, kayo ngayon lang, the last hour and a half, I mean, listening to Rodel, to Juan, to others, and parang wow, to Rosa. Lahat ng ginagawa natin, ang liit, ang kulang, globally, nationally, di ba? Locally. Ang layo sa pangangailangan, di ba? Ang sakit sa akin yung conclusion na, di ba, na meron nang mawawala, di ba? At maganda sana ma-localize sa atin, kaya ano kaya yung nawala, di ba? Dahil sa pagbabago ng panahon, pagbabago ng klima. At ano pang malapit nang mawala, di ba? Hindi yung matagal pang mawala, yung malapit na mawala, di ba? That strikes me very much, yung conclusion na no matter what we do, we've lost a lot already globally in terms of ecosystems, in terms of biodiversity. And yet the scale of our response, di ba? Even the very modest ambition of protecting 30%, di ba? Yung 30 by 30. Active din ako sa campaign na yon, requested by old friends to come back to the biodiversity issue because they need help in the global part of that. So I'm active in the campaign for nature to do that. But even that is not enough, di ba? And even that na mahirap gawin because of competing priorities. So napakahalaga yung pag-mainstream ng conclusions ng report na ito sa ating development priorities. Hindi lang siya consideration, di ba? Kung hindi, heart siya ng ating responses. Of course, ganun din sa emissions, di ba? In getting the right policies in place to even, okay na ako kung ma-meet lang natin yung NDC natin. Okay na ako even sa NDC, kahit hindi yung 75%, but importante sa akin yung peak of peaking emissions by 2030. Actually, malaking bagay yun. I take that as a separate goal from the 75% reduction. But scale, we cannot avoid the impacts, and we cannot, di ba, address the things that come out from this report if we do not double, triple, quadruple our response on mitigation and adaptation. And then there's a third thing I'd like to share with you, which is now my priority in the international negotiations, and even in the Philippines is my priority. We need really a third pillar in our response, and let me explain that clearly, legally, policy, and philosophically, what the third pillar is. Loss and damage is what we call it, diba, in the international negotiations. The two pillars of the response have always been adaptation and mitigation, both of which are long-term, diba? Or medium-term, even if we have to start activities on the short term, malinaw naman yon, diba, na even now we have to start. If you want to meet our NDC, ngayon pa man lang, may decisions ka na about coal, may decisions ka na about transportation, may decisions ka na about agriculture. So malinaw naman yon. Ganun din sa adaptation, di ba? Kahit na long-term yung resilience, building resilience, even now meron din naman. But what I've realized, especially after Odette, sabay-sabay kasi to Odette, the discussions in Glasgow on loss and damage. My reflections yung quadruple or quinta of storms last year, di ba yung 5 storms natin sa Luzon from lahat yung mga Tonyo, Ulysses, basta yung 5 storms last year. All of that, reflecting on it, and then has led me to conclude, diba, na hindi enough ang adaptation, hindi enough ang mitigation. Kasi how can you make communities, local governments, even local governments with resources, by the way, maraming resources in local government starting next year because of the Mandanas ruling, di ba? Significant infusion. Wala na silang excuse masyado about wala kaming pera for climate change, wala kaming pera for disaster. Actually, ang national government ang magkakaroon ng walang pera. And besides, of course, there's a whole ecosystem of climate finance that unfortunately we have not been able to tap because of our scale. Our scale is so immodest. Ang baba ng scale ng ating ambition for both mitigation and adaptation. Now, in fact, I don't think we need climate finance for the kind of scale we're doing. We can do all of those things on our own. We need climate finance if we want a huge scale, di ba, of response. But anyway, the third point I want to make about loss and damage is very simple lang. You cannot mitigate, you cannot adapt if you do not restore people to where they were when they're hit by climate change. You cannot think, di ba? Tingnan mo, I don't think Lau will Dr. Romero will be reluctant for me to say na yung kanyang electricity bill, di ba, yung nag-double, nag-triple, nag-quadruple, because diesel fuel, bumalik sila ng diesel fuel, di ba, sa Bohol, di ba? That's true all over this, di ba? Even if may mga konting solar, mga konting infusion na ganyan, but a disaster brings you back to zero or even less than zero for mitigation. And also for adaptation, if you have to go faster in building even your own house, di ba? In fact, one of the real estate person I talked to in these discussions I'm having with them was telling me na the most important thing daw yung ginawa nila after Odette was just to give parang 5 or 10,000 pesos to each of their employee affected by Odette in Surigao, so that they can rebuild their homes. Kasi paano natin pag-uusapan, di ba, yung long term, yung medium term, kung wala silang mga bahay, di ba? So I think we have to prioritize that at the international level, prioritize the creation of the facility. I can smell its creation, honestly. And this is coming from one who has negotiated climate change for 30 years, and the last 5 years have observed it as intimately pa rin as if I were there, even if I'm no longer negotiating for the Philippines for good reason. But I can smell it's coming. We're gonna create it. It will be bigger, better than the Green Climate Fund. But we have to really focus and get it done and make it the priority. I was in the Green Climate Fund for 4 years. It was great work. I was in the accreditation panel. Dami namin na accredited. Very proud. I accredited many of the big developing country development banks. But uphill climb ang trabaho ng adaptation and mitigation. Kasi just, alam na natin yan, nakita natin sa People's Survival Fund. Uphill climb yung pag-frame ng response according to a climate response. Diba? It's really an uphill climb. Kaya kahit nag-double, triple, quadruple, ma-meet man nila yung kanilang commitment on climate finance in developing countries, I think the absorption will be very slow, continue to be slow. But I think the loss and damage facility can solve some of that absorption problem because mas mabilis siguro dapat. If we do our things right, so local level, I've been encouraging my colleagues in Manila Observatory, both the scientists and the non-scientists, isipin natin, what if there's a facility? How will that happen? How will that come about? The report of the IPCC is for me the best argument on why the loss and damage facility has to be the priority internationally. And that locally, how to make it work, to get it fast to local governments, get it fast to private sector, get it fast to ordinary citizens, get that fast Diba? I will skip the liability part, the climate justice part in terms of getting the developing countries, getting the developed countries, or getting the the corporations, the carbon majors to be responsible. Tuloy dapat yung laban na yan. Pero sa ibang level yan. Ang level lang na ito is restitution. No need to blame anyone. Simply we have to return people back to where they are, so then they can do adaptation, then they can do mitigation. Third point ko yun. My fourth point is a no-brainer, and I'm sorry I have to say this kasi it's also so alam niyo naman, I'm so engrossed into climate justice. I have a big team now that's working on it and got the resources and recruited the people to do it. But at the same time, immersed in ako sa climate change, as a human rights story of this country, di ba? 2 of my clients were just killed in Davao de Oro, di ba? One a UP graduate, one Liceo de Davao graduate, both best and brightest Filipinos, di ba? I was actually also training them also for climate change kasi napakahalaga yung grassroots sa climate change, di ba? Napakahalaga sa loss and damage, sa adaptation, even sa mitigation na yung communities, lalo na yung indigenous peoples, and they were serving indigenous peoples are there. But what, di ba, if they're gonna be killed, if they're gonna be red tagged, di ba? How can they even think of climate change? Di ba? Actually, I gave them a training on climate change before they went back kasi where we plan to rebuild the schools and make them to be climate change resilience pioneers in the field all over the world, di ba yung ganon? And that was the question, paano yan? How can we even do that if we're gonna be killed? If we're gonna be arrested? So I just want to end with that note. Thank you po.